Among the ships that sailed the oceans during the Second World War, few captured the imagination quite like the German Battleship Bismarck. Sleek, massive, and bristling with firepower, she was a creation of both ambition and defiance, designed to strike fear into the hearts of her enemies. For a few short days in 1941, she lived up to her reputation, challenging the might of the Royal Navy and becoming a symbol of both German pride and Allied determination. The name Bismarck itself carried weight. It was chosen to honor Otto von Bismarck, the Iron Chancellor who had unified Germany in the 19th century. Like her namesake, the ship was intended to project strength, unity, and resolve. She was more than a vessel of war. She was propaganda in steel, meant to demonstrate that the Reich could not be contained by treaties or humbled by rivals. Yet her story is not only one of power, it is also a tale of hubris, tragedy, and inevitability. In her brief career, the Bismarck embodied the paradox of the battleship era: immense power rendered vulnerable by changing times. She was, in many ways, the last of her kind, a leviathan that roared across the sea, only to be brought down by relentless pursuit and the rise of air power. Historical context. To understand the Bismarck, one must return to the years following Germany's defeat in the First World War. The Treaty of Versailles, imposed in 1919, sought to cripple Germany's ability to wage war again. For the Navy, the restrictions were severe. The once proud Kaiserliche Marine was reduced to a token force, forbidden from building battleships of significant size or strength. For nearly a decade, Germany's shipyards lay quiet and its naval ambitions were stifled. But beneath the surface, resentment brewed. The desire to restore German prestige at sea remained strong among officers and politicians alike. When Adolf Hitler came to power in 1933, he openly defied the restrictions of Versailles. Rearmament became a central pillar of the Nazi regime, and with it came new dreams of a powerful navy. The Kriegsmarine, the Anglo-German Naval Agreement of 1935, allowed Germany to build a fleet up to 35% of the size of Britain's Royal Navy. Though framed as compromise, it gave Germany the legal cover it needed to begin constructing modern warships. Secretly, German naval planners envisioned even more ambitious projects, vessels that would dominate the Atlantic trade routes, challenge British supremacy, and threaten the lifelines of the empire. This vision became known as Plan Z, a grand scheme to create a balanced navy of aircraft carriers, cruisers, and battleships by the mid-1940s. At the heart of this plan stood the new class of battleships, the Bismarck and her sister ship, Tirpitz. They would be the largest warships ever built by Germany, armored against the heaviest guns afloat and armed to strike with devastating power. By the late 1930s, as Europe drifted toward war once more, construction began. In secretive shipyards along Germany's northern coast, a new colossus of steel was taking shape. She would soon sail into history, not as the harbinger of a long naval dominance, but as a brief and blazing nightmare of the Atlantic. Design and construction. The origins of Bismarck lay in the late 1930s, when German naval planners sought to create a ship that could outfight anything afloat. Their challenge was daunting. The Royal Navy was still the largest in the world, and the French Marine Nationale also possessed modern battleships. The Germans needed a vessel that could not only engage these opponents, but withstand punishment and escape to fight another day. Vision and planning design studies began under the codename Schlachtschiff F, later becoming the Bismarck. She was to be part of the Bismarck class, alongside her sister ship Tirpitz. German engineers envisioned a ship that combined speed, armor, and firepower, qualities that would allow her to raid Atlantic convoys and, if necessary, stand toe-to-toe with enemy capital ships. One guiding principle was survivability. The memory of the First World War and the loss of German battleships at Jutland was still strong. The new ship would carry immense armor protection, especially around the vitals, engines, magazines, and command centers. Another principle was range. The Atlantic was vast, and the Kriegsmarine needed ships capable of long voyages to disrupt Britain's lifelines. Construction at Blohm and Voss. The contract for building Bismarck was awarded to Blohm and Voss, a renowned shipbuilding company based in Hamburg. The keel was laid down on July 1st, 1936, in Dock 9 of the massive shipyard. From the beginning, secrecy surrounded the project. Although Germany was no longer bound by Versailles, Hitler's rearmament program remained politically sensitive abroad. The true size and capabilities of the new battleships were closely guarded secrets. As the months passed, a steel giant began to rise. Thousands of workers labored day and night, welding, riveting, and assembling her immense structure. The ship's hull stretched more than 250 meters in length, towering over the waters of the Elbe. To those who caught glimpses of her in the shipyard, she seemed less a ship than a floating fortress, bristling with promise. Launching ceremony. On February 14, 1939, the Bismarck was launched with great ceremony. Crowds gathered at the Blohm and Voss yard, and Nazi officials arrived to witness the spectacle. The ship slid majestically into the river Elbe, her black and red hull gleaming in the winter light. Dorothee von Löwenfeld, a granddaughter of Otto von Bismarck, performed the christening, smashing a bottle of champagne against the steel bow. As the vessel entered the water, a cheer rose from the gathered crowd. For Germany, the launch symbolized both technological mastery and the rebirth of maritime power. Fitting out. After her launch, Bismarck entered the lengthy process of fitting out. Turrets were installed, armor belts secured, and engines tested. Her towering superstructure rose high above the decks, crowned by rangefinders, communication equipment, and masts. Each day brought her closer to readiness, and each addition deepened the impression that she was a ship unlike any other afloat. By late summer 1940, she was nearing completion. Her sea trials began in the Baltic, where engineers tested her engines, steering, and weapons. Observers noted her speed and stability. Despite her immense bulk, Bismarck could move swiftly and handle rough seas with ease. To the men who crewed her, the ship felt like a floating city, complex, powerful, and alive. For the German Navy, she was the crown jewel of their fleet, the embodiment of Hitler's demand for prestige and dominance at sea. Technical characteristics. The Bismarck was one of the largest and most formidable battleships ever built in Europe. Every aspect of her design reflected Germany's ambition to field a ship that could challenge the naval giants of Britain and France. To the sailors who first set foot on her decks, she seemed less a ship and more a floating fortress built to dominate the seas. Dimensions and displacement. Fully loaded, Bismarck displaced more than 50,000 tons, though officially listed at around 41,700 tons to avoid provoking alarm among rival nations. She measured 251 meters in length, 823 feet, and 36 meters in beam, 118 feet, with a draft of 10 meters, 33 feet. Her profile was sleek yet imposing, her long bow cutting through the sea with elegance, while her wide beam granted her stability even in the rough waters of the Atlantic. Propulsion and speed. Her propulsion system consisted of 12 Wagner boilers feeding 3-geared steam turbines, producing over 150,000 shaft horsepower. This immense power drove 3 massive propellers, enabling Bismarck to reach speeds of more than 30 knots under trial conditions, remarkably fast for a ship of her size. Her cruising range was nearly 9,000 nautical miles at 19 knots, giving her the endurance needed for extended Atlantic operations. Main armament. The heart of Bismarck's offensive power lay in her main battery of 838 centimeter, 15-inch SKC/34 guns, mounted in 4 twin turrets, 2 forward and 2 aft. These guns were capable of firing armor-piercing shells weighing over 800 kilograms, 1,760 pounds, at ranges exceeding 20 miles. A single salvo from these colossal weapons could devastate even the heaviest enemy battleships. The turrets, designated Anton, Bruno, Caesar, and Dora, were marvels of engineering. Each rotated smoothly on hydraulic systems, while crews deep inside the ship loaded the vast shells with precision. When fired, the roar of the guns echoed like thunder, shaking the decks and sending plumes of smoke and flame skyward. Secondary and anti-aircraft weapons. Beyond her main guns, Bismarck carried a powerful array of secondary armament, 12 15cm, 5.9-inch. Guns in 6 twin turrets, designed to repel cruisers and destroyers. She also mounted 16 10.5cm, 4.1-inch, dual-purpose guns, capable of engaging both surface targets and aircraft. For close-range air defense, the ship bristled with lighter weapons, including 37mm and 20mm autocannons. As the war progressed, these weapons were considered insufficient against swarms of modern aircraft, but in 1940 to 41, they still provided formidable protection. Armor protection. Perhaps the most impressive feature of Bismarck was her armor. German designers placed enormous emphasis on survivability, creating a defensive system that blended thickness with careful angling. Her main belt armor measured up to 320mm, 12.6 inches, protecting the vital midsection of the ship. Her armored deck was layered up to 100mm, 4 inches, while the turret faces were shielded with an astonishing 360mm, 14 inches of hardened steel. Her conning tower, the nerve center of the ship, was encased in nearly a foot of armor, ensuring that commanders could continue to direct battle even under heavy fire. The philosophy was simple. Bismarck had to be able to take punishment from any enemy battleship and keep fighting. Crew and life aboard. A ship of such magnitude required a vast crew. At full complement, Bismarck carried over 2,200 officers and sailors. Life aboard was demanding, yet the ship offered better accommodations than many warships of the era. Officers had private cabins, while enlisted men slept in tiered bunks within shared compartments. Daily life was a mixture of discipline and routine, drills, maintenance, gunnery practice, and endless cleaning to keep the ship in prime condition. The mess halls provided hearty, if basic, meals, and the crew formed tight bonds in the steel labyrinth they called home. To many of them, serving aboard Bismarck was a source of immense pride, for they knew they sailed on the mightiest warship of the Kriegsmarine. Innovations and technology. The Bismarck also carried innovations that made her a modern warship of her age. She was fitted with advanced fire control systems, including stabilized rangefinders and primitive radar, allowing her to track targets at great distances, even in poor visibility. She also carried reconnaissance aircraft, Arado R-196 floatplanes, launched from catapults on her deck, which could scout ahead and spot targets for her guns. All of these features made the Bismarck a fearsome opponent. She was fast, heavily armed, and almost impervious to conventional attack. To the German Navy, she represented the perfect weapon to strike at Britain's vulnerable Atlantic convoys, threatening to cut the island nation's lifeline to the outside world. Sea trials and commissioning. After months of fitting out and testing, the Bismarck was officially commissioned into the Kriegsmarine on August 24, 1940. Captain Ernst Lindemann, a seasoned officer, was given command. During sea trials in the Baltic Sea, the battleship impressed her evaluators with speed, maneuverability, and stability. Despite her enormous bulk, she handled gracefully, slicing through waves and responding smoothly to the helm. For months, she remained in Baltic waters, conducting gunnery exercises, testing her weapons, and training her crew. The thunder of her 15-inch guns echoed across the sea as sailors learned the routines of loading, aiming, and firing. Each exercise brought the crew closer together, transforming them from raw recruits into a cohesive fighting unit. The Atlantic threat. By early 1941, Germany faced a daunting strategic challenge. Britain, though battered by air raids and cut off from much of Europe, remained in the fight. Her survival depended on the convoys that carried food, fuel, and weapons across the Atlantic from North America. These lifelines were already under attack by German U-boats, but the addition of surface raiders like Bismarck promised to make the threat even greater. Grand Admiral Erich Raeder, commander of the Kriegsmarine, proposed deploying Bismarck alongside the heavy cruiser Prinz Eugen to strike at Allied convoys in the North Atlantic. If successful, the mission could starve Britain into submission. Operation Rheinübung. The mission was codenamed Rheinübung, Rhine Exercise. On May 18, 1941, Bismarck and Prinz Eugen slipped quietly out of Gotenhafen, now Dynia, Poland, under heavy security. Escorted by destroyers, they headed north into the Baltic and then toward Norway, where they refueled in the fjords. British intelligence, aided by reconnaissance aircraft, soon detected their movement. Reports of a German battleship at sea alarmed the Admiralty. Winston Churchill himself issued the order, "Sink the Bismarck." Into the Denmark Strait. On May 21st, Bismarck and Prinz Eugen entered the Denmark Strait between Greenland and Iceland. There, British forces lay in wait. Admiral Sir John Tovey ordered the battleship HMS Prince of Wales and the battlecruiser HMS Hood, pride of the Royal Navy, to intercept. In the early hours of May 24th, the two fleets sighted one another. Mist and low clouds hung over the icy waters. At 5:52 a.m., Hood opened fire, followed moments later by Prince of Wales. Bismarck and Prince Eugen responded with thunderous salvos. The Battle of the Denmark Strait. What followed was one of the most famous naval battles in history. Within minutes, disaster struck the British. At 6 a.m., a shell from Bismarck's main battery struck Hood near her aft magazines. A tremendous explosion tore the great ship in half. In seconds she sank, carrying more than 1,400 men to the depths. Only 3 survived. For the Royal Navy, the loss of Hood was a national tragedy. For the crew of Bismarck, it was proof of their ship's terrible power. Yet, victory came at a cost. Bismarck herself had been struck by several shells, one of which ruptured fuel tanks in her bow, causing an oil leak that trailed behind her across the sea. The chase. After the battle, Bismarck and Prince Eugen separated. While the cruiser continued on her mission, Bismarck turned toward occupied France for repairs. The British, enraged by the loss of Hood, threw every available ship and aircraft into the pursuit. Across the North Atlantic, a relentless chase began. Battleships, cruisers, destroyers, and aircraft carriers all joined the hunt. British reconnaissance planes shadowed her progress, while surface ships closed in from multiple directions. Despite her damage, Bismarck managed to outpace many pursuers. For a time, she even slipped from contact, vanishing into the vast Atlantic. But the oil slick trailing her hull betrayed her position, and soon the hunt resumed with greater urgency. The shadow of pursuit. By May 26, 1941, Bismarck was heading southward toward the safety of occupied France. Repairs awaited her in Brest, and if she reached port, she could once again menace the Atlantic convoys. But the Royal Navy was determined to prevent that outcome at any cost. British reconnaissance aircraft, flying from the aircraft carrier HMS Ark Royal, eventually spotted the German battleship. A group of antiquated but reliable Fairey Swordfish biplanes was launched to attack. Despite their slow speed and fragile appearance, the Swordfish carried a deadly weapon, torpedoes capable of crippling even the mightiest warship. The Swordfish Strike. In the late afternoon of May 26th, the Swordfish descended upon Bismarck through low cloud and rain. Anti-aircraft fire erupted from the battleship's guns, tracers and flak bursting in the sky. Yet the biplanes pressed on fearlessly, skimming the waves and releasing their torpedoes at close range. Most of the torpedoes caused only minor damage, but one struck a fatal blow. It slammed into Bismarck's stern, jamming her rudder at an angle. Despite the crew's desperate efforts, the battleship could no longer steer properly. She was forced into a slow, circling course, trapped in the open ocean with the Royal Navy closing in. The night of torment. Through the night, British destroyers harassed the crippled battleship. They darted in and out of the darkness, launching torpedoes and gunfire. Though none delivered the final blow, the constant attacks exhausted the German crew and denied them any chance of escape. Captain Ernst Lindemann and Admiral Günther Lütjens both knew the end was inevitable. Messages were sent back to Germany. The Bismarck would fight to the last shell. For the men aboard, it was both a death sentence and a declaration of honor. The last stand at dawn on May 27th, the horizon filled with the silhouettes of British battleships. HMS King George V and HMS Rodney approached, supported by cruisers and destroyers. The Royal Navy had assembled overwhelming force to finish the job. At 8:47 a.m., Rodney opened fire, followed seconds later by King George V. The Bismarck replied with her forward turrets, but with her steering crippled and the enemy closing from multiple angles, she was at a grave disadvantage. Shell after shell rained down upon her. The British battleships fired with devastating accuracy, their 14 and 16-inch guns smashing into Bismarck's superstructure. One by one, her gun turrets were silenced, her rangefinders destroyed, her decks torn apart by fire and explosions. The scene was apocalyptic. Flames engulfed the ship, black smoke billowed skyward, and shattered steel littered the waves. Still, Bismarck fought back, firing until her guns were wrecked and her crew decimated. The end of the Bismarck. By mid-morning, the German battleship was a wreck. She drifted, ablaze and helpless, her once proud silhouette now broken and twisted. With her main armament silenced, British ships closed in, launching torpedoes to deliver the final blow. At approximately 10:40 a.m., Bismarck capsized and sank beneath the waves of the Atlantic. Of her crew of more than 2,200 men, only around 110 survived, pulled from the water by British ships before U-boat warnings forced them to depart. The rest went down with their ship, entombed in steel. The nightmare of the Atlantic was over. The most powerful battleship Germany had ever built had been destroyed in her first mission, brought down by the relentless pursuit of an enemy unwilling to let her escape. Symbol of power and tragedy, the sinking of Bismarck was more than the destruction of a warship. For Germany, she had been a symbol of technological mastery and national pride, a vessel meant to strike fear into enemies and project strength across the seas. Her loss, so sudden and so complete, was a crushing blow not only to the Kriegsmarine, but also to the morale of a nation already embattled. To the Allies, her destruction was a triumph of persistence and coordination. The Royal Navy, humiliated by the loss of HMS Hood, had redeemed its honor by hunting down and destroying her killer. For Britain, the chase and sinking of Bismarck became a moment of pride during one of the darkest periods of the war. In literature and film, the story of Bismarck has been retold countless times in books, documentaries, and films. Survivor accounts, naval histories, and dramatic retellings have sought to capture both the grandeur and the tragedy of the ship. C.S. Forester's writings, as well as Ludovic Kennedy's acclaimed book, Pursuit, The Chase and Sinking of the Bismarck, helped cement the legend in English-speaking audiences. In 1960, the British war film Sink the Bismarck brought the story to the big screen. With its dramatized portrayal of the battle and the relentless pursuit, the film introduced a new generation to the epic naval drama. In popular music, Johnny Horton's 1960 ballad Sink the Bismarck became a hit, ensuring that the ship's name remained in the public consciousness even beyond naval history. Rediscovery beneath the waves. For decades, Bismarck lay undisturbed at the bottom of the Atlantic, her exact location a mystery. In 1989, oceanographer Robert Ballard, famous for finding the wreck of the Titanic, led an expedition that located Bismarck's resting place, 4,791 meters below the surface. Images of the wreck stunned the world. The mighty hull lay fractured and broken, her turrets torn from their mounts, her stern twisted where torpedoes had struck. Yet parts of the ship remained hauntingly intact, a ghostly reminder of her former power. To see her lying silent beneath the cold Atlantic was to grasp the true violence of her final hours and the human cost that had gone down with her. Further expeditions in the years since have mapped the wreck in detail, confirming that the ship sank due to scuttling charges and flooding rather than enemy fire alone. For historians and naval enthusiasts, the wreck remains both a memorial and a source of fascination. In collective memory today, Bismarck is remembered as both a marvel and a warning. She epitomized the pinnacle of battleship design, yet her brief career underscored the changing nature of naval warfare. Despite her power, she was helpless against the coordination of aircraft, surface ships, and submarines, a clear sign that the age of the battleship had passed, replaced by the era of the aircraft carrier. In Germany, Bismarck is often recalled with a sense of melancholy pride, a ship that embodied national ambition only to meet a tragic and inevitable fate. In Britain, she remains a symbol of perseverance and resolve, an enemy worthy of respect but ultimately overcome. The story of the Bismarck is one of ambition, power, and tragedy. Conceived in secrecy, built with pride, and launched with the expectation of reshaping the war at sea, she was the mightiest battleship Germany ever produced. In her very design, she embodied the belief that armor and heavy guns could still dictate the fate of nations. Yet the Bismarck's fate was sealed not by weakness in her steel, but by the relentless evolution of warfare. Aircraft and carriers, coordination between fleets, and the reach of technology proved that even the largest battleship could be hunted down and destroyed. Her demise in May 1941 marked not only the end of her short career, but also the symbolic twilight of the battleship era. Still, she lives on in history and memory. The name Bismarck carries weight far beyond naval circles. It conjures images of courage and devastation, of roaring guns and towering plumes of smoke, of sailors who gave their lives in the chaos of the Atlantic. She reminds us of the human cost of war, the fragility of even the mightiest creations, and the enduring fascination we hold for machines that seem larger than life. To walk through a naval museum, to turn the pages of a survivor's memoir, or to see the haunting images of her wreck on the ocean floor is to feel the echo of her story. The Bismarck was not just a ship. She was a chapter in the long unfolding tale of human struggle, ingenuity, and the pursuit of power on the seas. And so, as we close this journey, we remember her not only as the nightmare of the Atlantic, but as a vessel that reflects both the heights of human engineering and the depths of human tragedy. The waves have claimed her, but the legend of the Bismarck endures, carried forward in books, in films, and in memory, as long as we tell the stories of the great ships that once ruled the seas.